Welcome everyone to the Nova Baha'i Center Sunday morning program. As we begin, everyone has been muted by the host, but we invite you to turn on your camera so that the speakers and performers are able to see you. We're very fortunate this morning to have live performers for our opening prayer and devotion. We will begin with a prayer by Lewis Songer Johnson, and that will be followed by a devotion sung by Mia Godfrey. So at this point, we are going to begin with Lua. Okay, Lua, I've unmuted you.
Okay. Oh, friend in the garden of thy heart. Oh, friend in the garden of thy heart. Plant not but the rose of love. Plant not but the rose of love. And from the nightingale of affection and desire, and from the nightingale of affection and desire, loosen not thy hold, loosen not thy hold. Treasure the companionship of the righteous and is true. Treasure the companionship of the righteous and is true. All fellowship with the ungodly, all fellowship with the ungodly, all fellowship with the ungodly, all fellowship with the ungodly.
Thank you, Lua. That was beautiful. We will now have a devotion from Mia Godfrey.
Be calm, be strong, be grateful, be grateful. Become a lamb full of light. Become a lamb full of
Thank you, Mia and Lua. It's so wonderful to have live music. Today, our speaker is Hediyeh Godfrey. Hediyeh is a Baha'i parent of 3, currently from Loudoun County, Virginia, who has dedicated much of her life to the education and training of children and youth, most recently as a passionate junior youth animator and a substitute teacher for Loudoun County Public Schools. Prior to becoming a parent, she worked as a software engineer and project manager and served on her company's diversity team. These days, you're likely to find her feverishly working on gaining deeper understanding and insight into the epidemic of racism in America and working tirelessly to dismantle systems of oppression while advocating for justice across platforms. Hediyeh's topic this morning is a facilitated conversation on race amity. So at this point, we are going to turn it over to Hediyeh.
Thank you, dear Sandra, and also to Lua and Mia for setting the tone this morning with their beautiful voices and uplifting prayers that they shared with us this morning. Friends, I'm going to ask a small favor. I know we've all gotten used to the comfort of sitting behind our computers and keeping our monitors off, but I want you to imagine that we're actually sitting together physically at the Baha'i Center. We don't come there with a paper bag over our heads where we can't see each other. So for my benefit, I selfishly ask that you turn your cameras on because we're in a shared space here. We're here to have this deep conversation on a very vital topic. And all I'll get to do today is share with you just a very, very little about what I've learned on the history of race and racism, not just in the country, but just as a system itself and how we even got to this place. And then to talk a little bit about what Baha'u'llah has done and what he has brought for the world, specifically on this subject of race and this idea of a conversation on race amity, amity itself implying friendship. I'm not sure how to go about establishing amity with white names on black screens on my window. And so again, I challenge you, I ask you to kindly turn your cameras on so that we can make this all the more intimate, all the more personal, and all the more safe for us to have these conversations. And I appreciate your courage in turning that camera on. That being said, again, I'm no expert on the topic. What I share here today is truly from personal learning and discovery. Feel free to challenge anything and everything that I say in this space, because we are all here to learn and grow from one another. So I think that's important so that no one walks away from this gathering today saying, oh, I heard Hediyeh Godfrey say this, and oh, this must be true because Hediyeh said. Hediyeh is nothing and Hediyeh is no one. This is just shared knowledge. I'm going to share my screen with you. I've attempted to put a bit of a presentation together to kind of help facilitate the dialogue and the conversation. If you can see a white screen with black words that says a conversation on race amity on your screen, give me a thumbs up so that I know the system's working. Excellent, great, and thank you. So let's dive in. And if at any point you have a question or something, feel free to raise your hand. And if I catch it or if one of the other hosts catch it, we can pause the conversation to discuss a little further, or you can just put it in the chat and I'm going to ask one of the co-hosts then to moderate the chat space for any questions that may arise so that we can address that as we move along. All right, here we go. So, whoops. As I was looking into how to even try to cover this topic on race amity, it being such a vast and big conversation, I thought, well, how can we even, I thought as a parent, and as a parent, when there's conflict between my children, I can't just dive in and say, all right, just, you know, settle down, just, you know, brush it off, shake hands, and go back to playing. It doesn't work that way. There is an injustice in that kind of treatment of just, you know, move on. As a parent, I have to sit and listen to my children. I have to sit and listen to their stories. I have to sit and listen to their struggle and understand what happened to bring them to this space of disunity. What happened for one of them or either of them to feel like some harm has been brought to them. And after listening to what they have said, then it's the hope that I can make a fair and reasonable conclusion or decision for them, and so that then I can advise them so that then they can move forward and reestablish their friendships and those bonds of love. And all of that, all those hard conversations are happening within the framework of love and understanding. And so I thought, well, okay, if I'm going to talk about race amity, about the unification and the friendship amongst the races, we can't do that if we don't go back and look at what brought us here in the first place. And so the first part of my presentation will be a very high level, brief history of what I could find as kind of the root causes of why we are where we are today after centuries of, you know, dehumanization and suppression and oppression of one race over the other. And then the second portion will be now, well, here's a healing message that's been brought to the world by Baha'u'llah, prophet founder of the Baha'i faith. And how can we now use this guidance? How can we use this new kind of divine instruction to go about and establish this amity that we so desperately need amongst the races of peoples? So I found this guy, Carl Linnaeus, in my search. And Carl Linnaeus was an anthropologist in the mid-18th century who was probably one of the first to document in any kind of scientific way a distinction in the races. He kind of started to study these differences amongst us. And what he had to say on the topic was this. He said, God created one man only, dictates scripture to us. Yet if the slightest trait difference was enough, there would easily stick out thousands of different species of man. They display namely white, red, black and gray hair, white, rosy, tawny and black faces, straight, stubby, crooked, flattened and aquiline noses. Among them we find giants and pygmies, fat and skinny people, erect, humpy, brittle and lame people, etc., etc. But who with a sane mind would be so frivolous as to call these distinct species? And I highlighted that sentence of who with a sane mind would be so frivolous as to call these distinct species. Because even as an anthropologist, while he was able to observe these differences in groups of people, the distinctions that he was able to make were all just physical traits, but nothing that made us different as a species. So even back then, and this is, again, this is 18th, in the 18th century. At this point, slavery was already in full swing, and distinctions and categorizations and oppression had already been happening for a long time. But I chose this particular thing because this is where now science was elevating this distinction. Science was inserting itself into the conversation and saying, look, here are the observations. And it went further, right? So today, when you look at, well, what defines the races? Why do we even have races? This was in some research that I did and found in the Encyclopedia of Genetics, Genomics, Proteomics, and Informatics. And what they had to say about human races is that human races are distinguished by anthropologists on the basis of anthropometric traits. Geneticists delineate the races on the basis of gene frequencies shared within the group and as different from other racial populations. The classification of races is compounded by social and cultural factors. So that's important, right? This classification is not happening, again, at a genetic level. It's happening through social and cultural factors. And based on these factors, they have now classified humanity into these structures, into these human races: Caucasoid, Mongoloids, and Negroid. They've added on to, those are the first three that they classified, and with time they have added on now the Khoisannoids or Capoids, which are the Bushmen and Hottentots, which I believe are down in the Australasian area. And again, the Pacific races have also been added. And so depending on what research paper you're reading, depending on whose science you're following, you'll ultimately come up with these groupings of humanity. And if there were to dig further, you'd find many other subgroups within the larger ethnic groups, right? Because again, depending on where you go, we start to find that these distinctions are being made by region, but still, these distinctions have been used to create political and societal distinctions and differences between the peoples. And even then, again, on a scientific basis, you know, back to the 18th century, where Linnaeus said that, yeah, who with a sound mind would create, you know, would consider these differences as a distinction in the species. Same thing is being said here. There is no genetic incompatibility among the various human races. In the late 90s, professor of biology in arts and sciences, Alan Templeton, had this to say on race. Race is a real cultural, political, and economic concept in society, but it is not a biological concept. And that, unfortunately, is what many people wrongfully consider to be the essence of race in humans: genetic differences. Evolutionary history is the key to understanding race. And new molecular biology techniques offer so much in recent evolutionary history. I wanted to bring some objectivity to the topic. This very objective analysis shows the outcome is not even a close call. There's nothing even like a really distinct subdivision of humanity, right? So over and over, scientists, anthropologists, while they're able to create classifications and groupings of people at the genetic level, down to the species level, they're saying, no, we're the same, we're the same. But that message seems to have been missed time and time and time again. And what's been taken away from it is the cultural, societal, and political distinctions that have been made. And you have to ask yourself, why? Why has this distinction been made? And so, before I move on to the next slide, I want to ask some questions for your thought, just now that you have this kind of foundational thinking as far as where race was introduced. Pause for a minute and think, what is your understanding of the terms race and racism? Did any of this ever play into that thinking for you? Or has your impression or your thought process on race or racism been different? How was it formulated? And then look back at your own life and see, well, when did you first become aware of racial distinction and classification? How old were you? Where were you? What was that experience like? When did you first gain this awareness that we're being treated differently because of skin color, because of facial features, because of any distinction that fits into these classifications that have been made? And just keep that thought in your mind as we move through, so that then later on, as we have an opportunity to ask questions, we can share these stories and see, well, how has history played a role into our understanding? How has our environment and our society played into our understanding of the formulation of race and racism? And so as the science continues, just a few weeks ago, again, as a substitute teacher, in the past few years, I've learned and have appreciated the contributions of Bill Nye, the science guy, in our world. And he, in response to a lot of what we're seeing in our world today, especially in the United States, he had this to offer on racism and race classification in the first place. So I share this with you now. Oops, sorry.
This is a map of the continents of the Earth showing how much ultraviolet light lands in each latitude. It turns out the closer you are to the equator, the more intense the ultraviolet. We use reds and purples. But then as you move away from the equator, we change the colors to orange, yellow, greens, and grays. Now here's the same map of the same continent with just one color. And it turns out that everybody on Earth is descended from people that live here in Africa. And then as groups of us moved around the world, the color of our skin had to change. And here's why. Our skin is where we make vitamin D. If you don't get enough ultraviolet, you don't get enough vitamin D. But if you get too much ultraviolet, then you break down your folates. You have to have it in perfect balance. And because the ultraviolet varies, the color of our skin varies. And that's it, everybody. That's why we have different colored skin. But we're all one species. But we're not treating each other fairly. Not everybody's getting an even shake. So it's time to change things.
So that's why we're here. We're here to change things, right? I love Bill Nye. I don't know if any of the kids on here hear Bill, Bill, Bill in the background, because he has this great introductory song for every one of his science videos. So, you know, what happened then? What happened historically, right? If we've got science telling us that, yeah, we have some cosmetic differences, how has this problem now become such a huge point of violence and oppression and you know, groups of people being severely taken advantage of and brutalized for centuries? How has that even happened when evidence looks different, right? And so I continued searching to try to understand, well, okay, so we've classified what race is. Well, how did racism come about? How did that get established? And as I dug a little deeper, this is where we start to see that, you know, different groups, this is where this idea of systemic problem, that the systematization of racism took hold, because all of these different groups, whether they're religious, even science, pseudoscience groups, medicine, philosophy, all of these different agencies then ended up playing a role. On the basis of religion, in the 16th and 17th centuries, right, which would be the 1500s, 1600s, right? This is now, it's the period of Reformation. So for big history buffs, you know more about what that is than I do. But this is now the period of Reformation. Catholicism, or Christianity, I should say, is now trying to take its foothold through the process of exploration and branching out from Europe into other parts of the world. And the Christian hierarchy now, as they're leaving their European spaces, their very, very white spaces, and embarking on these journeys and coming across lands where they're seeing people so entirely different from them, they start to question, well, are these beings that I'm seeing here, are they like me? Do these Blacks and these Indians, these indigenous people, do they even have a soul like we do? And so this became a huge question amongst the Christians of that time, and their hierarchy decided that, yeah, they don't have souls. So because they don't have souls, we can't, they're not human like we are. And so this is where the dehumanization begins. And the two major sects of Christianity at the time, the Catholics and the Protestants then, who were actively engaged in enslaving people, enslaving African people, brutalizing and torturing indigenous people on the lands where they were settling anywhere across the Americas. They started to treat these people differently because they weren't people to them, right? They were creatures that they could use for their own personal gain. And they used religion as their first defense, right? That was their first defense for their behavior. That was their first justification of the treatment. But eventually, again, because the intention was to convert and to bring people into the fold, and as these people that they were oppressing and forcing to work for them in systems of slavery, as they started to convert to Catholicism, convert to Christianity, then they no longer had that excuse. Then they couldn't use religion as an alibi. So they started to create other classifications and other distinctions to continue their systems of oppression. So every time the narrative would shift, they would change their behavior, they would change the rules, they would change the laws to further enable themselves to brutalize and oppress anyone who was different from their whiteness or what they considered their purity. And the more significant slavery became for them economically, the more they were able to profit and gain off of the backs of other people. This is where they now started to make biological distinction, zoological distinctions, botanical distinctions. I mean, literally, it's like reaching at straws, but they convinced themselves that, yep, this is true, this is fact. And as a society, they agreed that this was fair and just behavior towards people who they considered lesser than themselves. And then the science of the 19th century then was misconstrued. This is now the age of Darwin, right? Darwin publishes on the origin of species and the theory of the survival of the fittest is born. So now what do the white oppressors do, right? Now they take the theory of Darwin, who's talking about a very natural phenomenon that happens in nature is the survival of the fittest. So they take this to their advantage, and now they continue to take over the lands and take over the means of survival for these other races, and then say, yeah, see, they're not fit enough to survive. They're not making it. So Darwin is right. And what ends up happening with this very natural theory of survival of the fittest becomes reclassified as social Darwinism, meaning it's not really a natural loss of survival. It becomes a human enforced loss of survival for the oppressed groups, because you take away their land and not acknowledge that you've taken away their means of survival, and you sit back and you watch them die and you brutalize them and starve them and do these horrible things to these people, and claim that as your victory, and you own that as your strength, and you use the science of survival here, survival of the fittest, to claim yourself as the fittest in that group. And again, these anthropologists of that time also then continue to classify any non-white race as savage because they are different, because they are functioning in ways that don't fit the narratives of the European culture. And then now you go into medicine, and how medicine and pseudoscience then continue to, over centuries, oppress a whole group of people. And in 1850, an English anatomist by the name of Robert Knox, he concluded that people of color were intellectually inferior, not because of brain size, but because of brain texture and a lack of nerve endings. And he publishes his learnings, and it's widely accepted because he's a well-respected anatomist of the time. And it wasn't until later that it was discovered that all of his conclusions and everything that he had written were based on a single autopsy on one man of color that he had done. And his findings and his research and his publications were regarded as kind of the root and the origin of the system of epigenetics. No, I'm not sorry, eugenics. Eugenics that came about in the 1900s. So for over 100 years, medicine of that time, science of that time, used the works of Robert Knox to oppress, to use, and to abuse Black bodies for research, for maltreatment, and for then establishing this process of eugenics, which was the breeding and the sterilization of non-white people, specifically the sterilization of Black women in the 19th century. and also became a foundational resource for the Nazis during the Holocaust. So we can see how for a century and some, the research and the science of one person who made his analysis and his conclusions on one autopsy and the horrible ripple effects that that had and how widely accepted it was as fact and as science and as truth. So this and this thinking, I mean, we'd like to think that maybe now, you know, we're in the 21st century, but even as late as the late 20th century, that thinking continued. And there was a book called The Bell Curve, I believe, that came out in the late 90s and continued to profess these teachings of inferiority of the Black race and indigenous races in comparison to the white race, and continued to kind of use this narrative to marginalize and oppress these groups of people. Rudy Giuliani based a lot of his decisions for the education system in New York City and for a lot of the policies that were making New York City based on this book called The Bell Curve. That was done in, I believe it was 1998, it was published. So we can see that this thinking and this science, as much as we'd like to believe that we may have overcome some of this thinking, still continues to seep into our systems today. Our systems of lawmaking, our systems of policy writing continues today. So where does that leave us? Where does that leave us now? Well, right around the mid-19th, the mid-19th century is when Baha'u'llah came. And we've always talked, as Baha'is, we talk about progressive revelation. We talk about God having this divine connection with the peoples of the world from the dawn of time until now. And this idea that whenever humanity has kind of reached its lowest lows, a new divine teacher comes. Well, I can't think of a lower low in humanity's history than the continued oppression and brutalization of one group of people by another. And so it was during the height and in the midst of all of this chaos and calamity in the world that Baha'u'llah appeared in the world. And when and I'm not going to get in deeply into the history of the Baha'i faith, but I do want to touch now on the message that he brought into the world. But before I get into that, are there any questions or thoughts on anything that I've shared on the first part of what we've talked about so far as the history and just this kind of high level journey of race and racism to where we are today? Feel free to raise your hand or unmute and share or put it in the chat. And I don't know if you have unmuting powers, and if you don't, just put it in the chat and I think the host can unmute you. Oh, Sandra, you're muted, so I can't hear what you're saying.
Oh, I believe Emmanuel had a question, and
Okay.
I think he's on mute. He is unmuted now.
Okay.
So Emmanuel.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah, thank you so much for that presentation. I think it was excellent, really, to touch on really the real reasons why we are confronted with that racial divide today. But I wanted to mention it's not only between black and whites. I mean, there are so many racial divides for other groups. I'm thinking about the LGBT population, the gypsies. I mean, they have suffered exactly the same consequences. I mean, even in liberal countries like Scandinavia, until the early 1960s, I mean, you had some laboratories making experiments, medical experiments on the LGBT population. Like, I mean, during the Nazi era in Germany, the gypsies, recently I learned that in France, I mean, there are still laws prohibiting gypsies to get works, jobs. So in many European countries, you have a stigma against the gypsy population. People will tell you, oh yeah, they are burglars, they are bad people. But I mean, how they can survive without having the right to have jobs? And so I think the debate should be open to more categories of populations than just blacks and whites.
I think you're absolutely right, Emmanuel, and certainly I didn't mean to imply just black and white, and in fact that classification of the races, you know, we know that in the New Zealand area and in the Australasian continent, you know, same idea with European settlers coming to that area and almost they wiped out an entire race of people there and wiped out half of the Maori Indians, natives at that time as well. And so the regrowth of these populations, and you're absolutely right, depending on where you are regionally, this idea of oppression, this idea of abuse has been centuries in the making. It's not new. We are still living the consequences of that. And which is why I wanted to highlight that, okay, so it's during the midst of all of this calamity in the world that a new light has been brought into the world to help us, to guide us out of this state. And it's only been about 170 years since Baha'u'llah's message has been brought into the world. And hopefully through this guidance and with time, we'll be able to kind of really uproot the systems of racism and bring humanity to this place of oneness and amity, right? This idea of amity that we're working towards will come through conversations like this, through working in our daily lives to uproot these systems, to dismantle them, to identify them, break them down, and rebuild them in a more just and fair order. So when we're talking about, you know, race and racism, yeah, it's not just black and white at all. But because we live in America and we're having this conversation here, our circle of control as Americans, whether we came as immigrants, myself, I'm an immigrant here. I was born and raised in Belize, spent half my life there, second half of my life here. And so my experiences growing up and my concept and understanding of race and racism has shifted and changed because of my experiences in the United States and what I'm learning about US history and that system of oppression here. So in the United States, it's really more, you know, white oppressors and black and indigenous groups of people who have suffered. And when we say white, we often just envision white Europeans, and we forget that Middle Easterns are classified as white. And so for those of us that have Middle Eastern background, we are part of that definition of white, that Caucasoid definition. We fit that description. We are part of that classification. And so to kind of know and understand where our place is, it kind of helps us understand better what our role in the conversation is and what our role in the work of dismantling racism is. And again, if there's any other thoughts or ideas, and again, the understanding of race and racism is global, depending on where you are in the world. It's, you know, different groups may be oppressed, but I think even on a global scale, the distinction has generally, if not always, been the white race oppressing whatever was non-white, and whatever was, and so even in the time of Nazi Germany, the Nazis considered that Aryan race, they considered themselves pure, and their oppression was against anything that was different or anyone that was different from them, whether it was Jews or any faith that was other than, it was primarily the Jews, but also a lot of LGBT disabled individuals, you know, mentally or developmentally delayed individuals were also part of that oppression and part of the abuse and part of the experimentation and the eugenics and all that took place during the Holocaust included all of these other subgroups. So I don't know if that helps as we move forward. Sandra, did you see if anyone else had a hand up or wanted to share something at this point as we move now into the second part of the presentation, where we're going to dive deep into what the Baha'i teachings offer us as a solution to these problems?
Yes, Kate had a comment, I believe.
Okay.
I guess I feel like, and maybe you're about to get into this, Hediyeh, but I feel like the reason we're even having this discussion today, the reason that this topic has even come up right now, is not because we aren't aware that discrimination goes on everywhere, all over the world, but because there's a specific challenge going on here in America right now. And in the Baha'i writings, it's even said that it is the most challenging issue confronting America. And so I'm not trying to belittle the discrimination that goes on in all forms all over the world, but it's so big to talk about all of that I feel, and since we're sitting here in the United States of America right now, and we have specific writings that talk about this specific issue of Black and white racism, I guess I feel like that needs to be honed in on and discussed. And it's even mentioned that if that is resolved, that Black-white issue, all these other forms of discrimination will in some way be addressed and will be resolved. And so that's all I wanted to share.
Thank you, Kit. I think that was really useful. I think I saw Mitch's hand go up in the...
Yeah. Hediyeh, you're doing a wonderful job of facilitating such a complex and important subject, and you're bringing to the forefront how our society is so infected with this that we mostly don't even realize it and how it got this way. The one thing that occurred to me is this wonderful short Bill Nye video you showed. The world map he used is the same one that 100 years ago when I was in school was on all our boards. It is a promotion of racism itself. I'll give you a quick, the middle of the map is Western Europe. It is a top-down view of the world. And so the way to look at it is Australia is at least as big as the United States, but it looks like a little island. But the reason is so that Africa doesn't look so much larger than the United States and Europe. I will leave you, go on the internet and look at a map of the world where things are properly sized, and it will change your view. And you have to think about why they did that. In fact, I grew up during the Cold War, and I'll end on this. The map that was on our schoolroom separated the Soviet Union into two parts. And the reason is because it's 11 time zones, and they didn't want to show us that it's so much larger than us. So even the maps we use are infected, and we really have a lot of work to do. Thank you, Hediyeh. This is wonderful.
Thank you, Mitch, for sharing that. I mean, again, this is why I invite all of you to challenge everything that you see here today, everything that I say, that anyone shares. We are here to challenge one another's thinking and to help each other grow and learn through this process of conversation, through personal investigation. I mean, again, in the independent investigation of truth is one of the fundamental tenets of the Baha'i faith. One of the gifts that Baha'u'llah has given us as individuals is that we all are enabled to seek truth for ourselves. Now, whether that's on science, whether that's on philosophy, whether that's on religion, whatever it is, we have been empowered and enabled by Baha'u'llah in this day and age to seek the truth for ourselves, and to question what we read and to question what we hear, because it's through this questioning that we can get to the crux of the matter, the truth of the matter. So, okay, so all that being said, now let's deep dive together a little bit into what Baha'u'llah has said on humanity. I chose these two hidden words, and I think they go hand in hand and again, Baha'u'llah's revelation is vast and mighty. There are hundreds of volumes of direct revelation that as individuals we have access to. And again, what I have chosen for today is very, very nuanced and very, very specific to our conversation. And it's barely the tip of the iceberg. If you continue your quest for independent investigation, you will find so much more in the Baha'i writings on this topic. But for our conversation today, we're going to focus on a few selections, and we'll share our understanding together so that by the end of it, we can all leave this space with a little bit more enlightenment than when we woke up this morning. So Baha'u'llah says in one of his hidden words, "O children of men, know ye not why we created you all from the same dust? That no one should exalt himself over the other. Ponder at all times in your hearts how ye were created. Since we have created you all from one same substance, it is incumbent on you to be even as one soul, to walk with the same feet, eat with the same mouth, and dwell in the same land, that from your inmost being, by your deeds and actions, the signs of oneness and the essence of detachment may be made manifest." And again, I want you to think about the time in history where this was said, right? 1860s. This is when Baha'u'llah, 1860s, 1870s is when the hidden words were revealed by Baha'u'llah. And what was happening during that time in the world? If anyone knows, who knows what happened in the United States in 1863?
The Civil War.
Civil War, but something, this is just past the Civil War.
The Emancipation Proclamation.
That's right. The Emancipation Proclamation came out in 1863 as well, right? So right again, and from deeper study and understanding of the historical value of the manifestations of God, when they appear on earth, they release such an energy and such a vibrancy throughout the world that every atom, and there's a quote on this in the Baha'i writings, and I don't know it off the top of my head. If someone knows it, feel free to share it. But the essence of what has been said on the potency of the dawning of a new manifestation of God on earth is that they release such an energy in the world that every atom is affected. Every being becomes affected, whether they are aware or unaware of the coming or the dawning of this new light. And so right at the time where Baha'u'llah is declaring who he is as the divine teacher for mankind for the next 1,000 years, as the mouthpiece of God on earth for the next 1,000 years, and he's telling us that we were created from the same dust, that we should not exalt ourselves over the other. And this is happening in Persia. And right here in America at the same time, the Emancipation Proclamation was signed. Now, that in and of itself is a study, and we're still reeling from the side effects of the Emancipation Proclamation, how it was written and how it was unfurled in the United States, and the systems of the shifting systems of oppression that came after the enslaved people were freed. But then, you know, we get into segregation, we get into Jim Crow laws, we get into all these other things historically. But this was the beginning. This was the stepping stone. Baha'u'llah also says, "O son of spirit, the best beloved of all things in my sight is justice. Turn not away therefrom if thou desirest me, and neglect it not that I may confide in thee. By its aid thou shalt see with thine own eyes, and not through the eyes of others, and shalt know thine own knowledge, and not through the knowledge of thy neighbor. Ponder this in thy heart, how it behooveth thee to be. Verily, justice is my gift to thee, and the sign of my loving kindness. Set it before thine eyes." So he's telling us we are equal. We were created from the same dust. that we are the signs of oneness in the world, and he's telling us, he is giving us this gift of justice and this gift of discernment and this gift of seeing with our own eyes, right? Because prior to this, there was a dependency from humanity on a group of learned men, on a group of scholars or others to tell us what the word of God is and what potency it has for us, and then dictate for us how we are to live our lives and how we are to take action. But Baha'u'llah has freed us from this in a way that hasn't been done before. So now what I'm going to share with you, I could sit here and tell you my thinking, but Todd Ewing is a beloved Baha'i in the Washington, D.C. area. He is a well-known author of books on this issue of kind of the Baha'i perspective on race and healing. And so I thought I would share this video with you so that we can gain a little bit deeper insight and glean some more understanding on the Baha'i perspective and the Baha'i approach on racial healing or healing the racial divide.
The pivotal principle of the Baha'i faith is the oneness of the human family, that the human race is moving from what we believe to be adolescence to adulthood. And so this concept of otherness that's dominated society forever has to change into this concept of oneness and unity. So one, we have to change a consciousness. It seems like a vague term, but until you have a consciousness of oneness, then you can't build a society that's based on that. If you have a consciousness of otherness, that's how things play itself out. So we have that basic consciousness of our oneness, the basic consciousness of a belief in God that wants us to come together as one. And then the Baha'i faith offers very specific teachings, and I deal a lot with the black-white issues. So we have this consciousness, this belief in God, and then we have, okay, then what do whites and blacks specifically have to do to bring about, and I'll just talk about those two groups right now, specifically have to do to bring about this unity and this oneness. Well, beyond trying to spiritualize our lives and transform ourselves, there's some very specific guidance, and it's very challenging to look at, and only from a spiritual standpoint, in my view, can I view it as something that I could possibly do. And so there's very specific guidance to white people in the Baha'i scriptures that suggest that they have to rid themselves of their inherent sense of superiority, and that they have to rid themselves of a patronizing attitude, and that they have to be patient if, for example, and I'm kind of cutting to the chase on this, if black people don't respond immediately to their overtures. And they said because black people have received for so long such grievous and slow healing wounds. And the writings go on to say that white people have to persuade
Was it supposed to stop?
genuineness of their friendship. Suspicion that may linger in our hearts, that we have to show the warmth of our response, for example. And the Baha'i faith says that that's kind of an equation, that if whites do this, blacks do this, then we can bring about a particular unity and a oneness of the human family. So it's applied spirituality, all right? Now, for me to actually show the warmth of my response to people that I've been suspicious about most of my life means I have to be in constant prayer to elevate my thinking and my consciousness and my spirit so that I can truly, and again, it's a cliche, look at those people not from what has happened to me in the past, but as a creation of God who is valuable in the fact that they are a creation of God, and love them for the sake of God. Now these are, again, terms, principles that can apply in a lot of religions, but the application of it on a daily basis as I interact with white folks in this community or any other community, I find challenging. But those are things that the Baha'i faith is suggesting very specifically can begin to heal the wounds of racism between blacks and whites. There's more, but that's a particular equation that is given to us. And in that equation,
it makes it clear, and I think this is another thing that spirituality brings to the table in religion, is that in the realm of spirituality, in a sense, there are no victims, because we all have the capacity to draw on the power of God to transform and transcend anything that we've been through. And so in society, we may say there's victims and people are oppressed, which is true, but yet at the same time, there's a capacity that we can draw on to overcome any of that. And that's a belief that most religions hold. If you tap that power of God, if you draw on that power of God, if you have that connection, that you can overcome almost anything. And it's required, I think, if, for example, I'm going to be forgiving. Because it's not that I have to be forgiving once or twice. It's I have to be forgiving 4 and 5 and 6 and 7 and 8 and 10 times and throughout my life. Well, I have to have something to draw on that's greater than myself to be able to do that. I think spirituality, and I think the Baha'i faith, I don't want to say in particular, because I think most religions have that belief, but as a Baha'i, that's a very strong principle. In fact, we're told that when somebody harms us, we should instantly forgive them, which is, again, easy to say, very, very tough to do. The application of that is if somebody is racist, somebody does a racist thing toward me, the suggestion is that I should instantly forgive them. And in forgiving people, in my understanding of the Baha'i faith, I'm not saying it's all right that they did it. I'm saying that my spiritual responsibility to create healing is to forgive. And again, that's a spiritual construct. It's not an emotional one. Emotionally, I can't forgive day in and day out. I have to be able to renew that, draw on something to renew that. And that's what, to me, spirituality is about, and what the Baha'i faith offers me in terms of being consistent.
Whew. So, God bless Todd Ewing and his remarkable, incredible insights on this topic. Does anyone have anything they'd like to share after hearing this perspective? And what Todd shared is, his understanding of the Baha'i teachings on the distinction between spirituality and I guess our physical selves, and the role of forgiveness, our spiritual capacity to forgive versus our emotional capacity, and what role that plays on this path to race amity, right? How do we get to this place where we can even talk about race amity, given where we are today? So if anyone has something or any insight or feedback or any feelings you have after watching that or hearing that, we can pause for a minute and reflect, and then we're going to go into studying together some of the actual writings or selections from the Baha'i writings on this topic. And Sandra, I can't see if people have raised their hands or if they're putting anything in chat, so.
Yes, you can raise your hand if you click on participants, and then you can click on raise hand, or you can go to the group chat and tell me you want to speak. And I believe at this point, anyone can also unmute themselves and just speak if you would like to make a comment.
And if not, we'll move forward. So this is a selection from the writings of Abdu'l-Baha. And actually, I don't like to, to just be the only one talking. So could I ask someone who is comfortable to unmute and read this quotation, and while this individual reads it, the rest of us can reflect on it, and then we're going to discuss what it means to us. Like, what's our takeaway from reading this selection from Abdu'l-Baha? And Abdu'l-Baha is the son of Baha'u'llah, and he was appointed the center of his covenant upon Baha'u'llah's passing. This is a unique station that's been given to him, and it's distinguished from every other dispensation of the past because the appointment of Abdu'l-Baha as the center of the Baha'i covenant was a unique protection and safeguard for the Baha'i faith to prevent it from schism, prevent division from taking place, which is why today you can go to any part of the world and, look up the Baha'i faith, and what you hear there will be the same thing you hear here, which will be the same thing you hear in China or wherever you go in the world. The Baha'i faith is one, and that's, due to the appointment of Abdu'l-Baha as the center of the covenant. And there's another quote we're going to discuss later by the guardian, Shoghi Effendi, who was appointed to serve in a similar capacity as the guardian of the faith upon the passing of Abdu'l-Baha. So these were the protections and safety measures that were put in place to keep the Baha'i faith from dividing. And I'm oversimplifying their role, but just for a little bit of insight for the friends who aren't familiar with who these individuals are. Let's see. Bernard, would you feel comfortable unmuting and reading this quote for us?
Absolutely.
Thank you.
O ye beloved of the Lord, the kingdom of God is founded upon equity and justice, and also upon mercy, compassion, and kindness to every living soul. Strive ye then with all your heart to treat compassionately all humankind, except for those who have some selfish private motive or some disease of the soul. Kindness cannot be shown the tyrant, the deceiver, or the thief, because far from awakening them to the error of their ways, it maketh them to continue in their perversity as before. No matter how much kindliness ye may expend upon the liar, he will but lie the more. For he believeth you to be deceived, while ye understand him but too well, and only remain silent out of your extreme compassion. Abdu'l-Baha, Selections from the Writings of Abdu'l-Baha, page 158.
Thank you, Bernard.
You're welcome.
Would someone care to share any part of this quote that resonated with them? Is there something in here that strikes you, that challenges your thinking, that supports your thinking on the topic of forgiveness, on the topic of justice, on kindness towards others? Any reflections?
Well, I recently became aware of another scripture from Abdu'l-Baha, which really struck me. And he says, compassion, among one or other thing, is the source of the stability of the world. I mean, it's so powerful.
Thank you, Emmanuel. Anyone else? Remember, the topic for today is a conversation on race, Amity, not a lecture. Can't be a conversation if I'm the only one talking.
Well, I can certainly say that there's a rich history of Black people being tyrannized by folks here, both socioeconomically, physically, emotionally, mentally, and the list goes on. And I often struggle to try and figure out how to best reach those who are willing to understand the insidious issues that are going on both now and in a aforetime with my ancestors. How to get them to understand that it's not something that we can just smile and be friendly to each other and eradicate, that it's going to take work. It's going to take serious deep diving and understanding of both the pain and the residual effects of things that have happened and continue to happen. That the narrative that we are presented through the media, through music, even through our social interactions with friends, a lot of it is not true. It's both damaging and painful. I say this now, I'm sorry, I was looking at the quote, it struck me because I was just thinking, wow, there's so much of what the master shared, like I see it like often. And sometimes it comes in the guise of just innocence. Oh, I didn't know, I didn't understand, but it's still equally damaging and painful. I should say, Hediyeh, I'm sorry, but so happy to see so many people here today supporting supporting this gathering. It really means a lot to see us all striving to come to a great understanding. So I say this just in both general terms, but also as in my experience, just in being in any religious community that is Black primarily, but that many times I feel like I have to have my guard up when I leave home in my social interactions. But even more so, it's painful when the place where I should be able to let my hat hang low and be myself, sometimes I find that I'm also on guard for very specific reasons. And to have to explain it again and again, it's draining. As an African American, I don't know if that's the case for everyone. There may be communities that don't experience this, but it's my reality. And sometimes even my children are like, what in the world? Like, they don't understand some of the things that are said and sentiments that defer the real issue that's going on here in my country, in America, even though I'm aware of other aspects and issues that are going on in the world. I'll stop there. I feel like I'm saying too much.
I don't think it's too much. I think I'm grateful for how open and honest you were with sharing that with us. And I hope it encourages others to also participate and share their thoughts. I see 2 hands have gone up. I think, Jill, I saw yours. I didn't see who the second person was.
Yeah, I just wanted to, sorry, something that Bernard said and something that like struck me through this is that this lack of knowledge that a lot of us have about the problems that are within our society sometimes being what we're unaware of. And I think that doing due diligence to try and learn the history and the problematic systems that we have around us that affect us as Baha'is as well, that we bring into our communities, like just increasing our awareness so that we do recognize when, you know, like when something is assisting or strengthening our racist thoughts, you know, versus like just having that recognition that even goes to something that Todd said. Because part of that quote that he talks about, that instantly forgiving someone, the rest of that quote, Abdu'l-Baha talks about, if someone were to kill me, I would instantly forgive them. But if they were going to go after my friend, I would immediately stop them. So we need to educate ourselves so that we could recognize when these problematic systems happen in our community, and we can protect our brothers and sisters so that they can forgive, because they know other people are affecting also the aspect of the justice piece. Like the community has to help with that. So I think that educational piece of being able to recognize that within ourselves and within the people around us so that we can do that is very important.
Thank you for making that distinction and for adding on to that quotation that Todd was referencing in his in that video that we watched. And that is vital. I mean, even here in this quote, an exception is being made to this idea of kindliness, right? Because again, the foundational teaching, the fundamental teaching, and the main reason Baha'u'llah has come is for the unification of the world. He has come to teach oneness. And even in that hidden word that we shared, you know, he equalized all of humanity, because he reminded us we were created from the same stock. We were created the same, and we were not to, you know, one group elevate over the other. That being said, though, there are people who have given in to their urges of selfishness and greed, and to that lower nature that we all have. Some people have given into that. And Abdu'l-Baha is telling us here that, yes, we are to forgive. Yes, we are to treat people with compassion and kindness and mercy, except those that have some selfish private motive or some disease of the soul. So we have to be, you know, this is where discernment comes into play. This is where we have to use that intellect that we now have, that we have achieved as a species over, you know, evolutionary over time, and where we are now in the 21st century. We have evolved to the point where we have discernment and can make this distinction. I think there was one more hand up, Sandra. I can't see who that was.
Payman.
Payman. Okay, go ahead, Payman, and then we'll go to the next quote.
Yes, thank you again, Hediyeh, and everyone who's contributing. This is sometimes an uncomfortable conversation for some of us. You know, we want to be careful not to say the wrong thing or you know, it's especially right now but of course that is not the case, and we have to speak up and participate and learn, and you know, we may fall and slip and make a mistake. And this is Mr. Rutstein. I remember many years ago he was talking about racism, and he has a great book about it. He was saying, he almost was saying that we're all almost asymptomatically racist because, or not racist, I'm sorry, in the environment that we've grown, the example that Mitch was saying about the maps or the way news media, the way, like he was saying, when a black family moved into their area, the parents came home and said, oh, we need to move. And we don't even realize it, that a lot of these things have been kind of educated into us. And we really have to delve deep to try to change this. And we have to make a conscious decision, have these conversations, make an effort to go read and learn, and to enable to be educated, because as we know, racism, a lot of it is just misinformation and ignorance. So we just do have to, I know you and Bernard were saying, well, we have actual firesides in our, you know, we just put a fire pit and invite our neighbors to talk about this. And it's really through changing souls and really diving deep and having these conversations, having these, you know, going through trainings and really learning and really, it's really making a conscious and reaching out and reaching out to other races and becoming true friends and learning from each other. And unless we cannot commit to that, it's probably not going to change very fast. Thank you.
Thank you, Payman. Ishmael, I see your hand, but is it okay if we move to the next quote? Okay, but write it down so you don't forget, because I want you to bring it up in the next opportunity. But I do want to keep the conversation moving forward too. Actually, would you mind reading this quote, Ishmael, for us?
Let the white make a supreme effort in the resolve to contribute their share to the solution of this problem, to abandon once and for all their usual inherent and at times subconscious sense of superiority, to correct their tendency towards revealing a patronizing attitude towards the members of the other race, to persuade them through their intimate, spontaneous, and informal association with them of the genuineness of their friendship and the sincerity of their intentions, and to master their impatience of any lack of responsiveness on the part of a people who have received for so long a period such grievous and slow healing wounds. Shoghi Effendi, the Advent of the Divine Justice.
So I think this quotation speaks directly to what Payman was just sharing, and it also refers back to what Todd had shared in his talk about kind of this expectation, unconscious likely, of the white community, that when they make a little effort, if it's not received with, you know, great celebration and great joy, sometimes it's off-putting for, and again, I use the term white to classify, you know, Caucasians and Middle Easterns and everyone who falls under that umbrella. And so this idea of making a supreme effort in our resolve to contribute our share to the solution of this problem. Again, when you look back historically, not just in America, but in the whole world, the entire system of racism this distinction, this socio-political classification that was made for the benefit and for the profit of white society. Well, again, let's go back to thinking of it as a parent, right? When I look at my children and they're misbehaving and someone has done something terrible to the other, well, I would expect the oppressor, the one who was in the wrong, to make the effort to kind of fix what they have done, right? Apologize for what you've done, acknowledge what you have done. What do you plan to do going forward, right? This is the whole 4-part apology that maybe many of us as parents have come to learn. This is the same type of expectation that's being kind of levied here in this one little selection from Shori Effendi being the guardian and successor of Abdul Baha. And he wrote The Advent of Divine Justice, which is really, if you want any kind of a handbook or a manual or instructions on how to heal the problem of racism, and if you want to read nothing else in your life, just read The Advent of Divine Justice, right? And if your focus is on healing race and racism, that should be the Bible of fixing racism, for lack of a better way of describing it. Ishmael, did you want to share your thought now on
Yes.
from the previous quote on this one?
Yeah.
And anyone else who would like to reflect on this, please go ahead and raise your hand so we can call on you. Go ahead.
Thank you, Hediyeh, for giving me the opportunity of expressing my views on this wonderful topic. One of the things I admire about the Baha'i writings is that when the beloved master said, you know, when you see doves, white and black doves soar together, and they don't look at their color, they look at the species, you know, and humankind, which is actually of a higher intellect and a higher level in this world, look at the color of their skin, which is very, very, I think it's very, very not spiritual at all. And because the reason is because I think my personal view is like lack of education. These are intentionally done in the Western and other places, cultures where they don't actually allow the people to read about the historical injustices that have been inflicted upon different races, especially when I talk of the black and white as far as slavery is concerned. While I was growing up in Kenya, Africa, we were taught the full history, 100%, where slavery started, who encouraged, they even had the names of the slave masters. So we were very knowledgeable, and that's how colonialism ended in Africa, apart from the apartheid in South Africa. That took a long time because people were awakened to this injustice and they had to liberate themselves from colonialization that was taking place. So I think over here in the United States, you know, these are done, like it was mentioned in one of the letters from the House of Justice. They are covert and they're done intentionally, you know, so that the individuals don't know exactly, you know, it's a systematic process, you know, which is very, very brutal, you know, in so many ways. And until we confront this genuinely, without fear of making mistakes, it's okay to make mistakes because you learn in the process of making mistakes. How would you know about discussing about racial amity or racial unity unless you discuss or say something and gain knowledge from the other person who's also talking? It's like consultation. You know, you sit together and consult on an issue and it comes out to be fruitful at the end, and knowledge is the key. So like in the Baha'i faith, we are given, you know, to independently investigate. We shouldn't use what other people are saying as far as, you know, this kind of people behave like this, you know, those kind of phrases, or this, black people are always loud, or, you know, these common phrases that, you know, that are being made up to divide people. So when we teach our children to independently investigate and understand the history of each other's culture, then I think it's going to be an opportunity for them to also have an open mind. And I'm seeing right now the generation is changing. People are now open-minded. The young are not trying to follow what their parents did, and they're more open-minded, and they're trying to, because it's going to be their generation to live, you know. You can hide for so long, but at the end of it, like the midday sun, everything will be clear, and they will all know the truth of this disease that we are having in our souls. Thank you, Hediyeh.
Thank you so much, Ishmael. That was deeply personal, and what great insight to know what's happening and how things have been taught in other parts of the world. Imagine what it would be like in the United States if the truth were taught in schools. Just this morning, before, you know, I got out of bed and got ready for what we're doing today, I got a message on Facebook. You know, one of our school board representatives had posted something in response to Virginia making a ruling on creating curriculum for teaching slavery, the history of slavery, for the K through 2 age group, because it's something that hasn't been done before. It's not really something that is taught. And immediately in the comments, there were, you know, there's this distinction in the responses from people. You know, several people were like, oh, it's too young, and why would we be teaching kindergartners about slavery? This is too heavy a topic. No, they're not ready for this. You know, but, you know, they can learn about George Washington, they can learn about these things, but they don't need to learn about slavery. That's too young. And my first thought process was, every person of color that's been born in this country is born with that heritage. From infancy, they are raised to know their history. What makes the distinction between Black children and white children, where Black children have to carry this burden of their history, this knowledge of their history, but white children have to be protected. They have to be shielded from the truth that was history, right? And of course, you know, I can't imagine the curriculum for K through 2, you know, going into the deep violence and brutality of slavery, because that age group education is introductory. You're just introducing the concept, you're just touching on the subject, but you're laying the foundation for further growth and development as they go through school and go through the process of education. So even now, on you know, August 2nd of 2020, we still have people who are deeply disturbed and find it very challenging when the truth is being offered and the truth is being presented, because they're not prepared for it. They're not emotionally ready to handle the truth of our history. They're not ready to acknowledge what has happened. We are slowly, we have 3 minutes left, and I've got a couple more slides that I want to share with you. I see some hands up, but let's put a pin in that so that I can share. I'd like to share, this one is a statement from the National Spiritual Assembly, the governing body of the United States. And the last quote that I'm sharing is from the most recent message from the governing body of the Baha'i World, the Universal House of Justice. And in the interest of time, I'll go ahead and read these. And when we get to the end of it, and again, for anyone who needs to leave, I understand it. We've taken your time. If you need to drop at 12, please do. At the end of it, I've got 2 prayers that I want to share that I think are relevant to our conversation today. If you can stick around for that, great. And then if there's time, anyone else who wants to linger and talk further, I'm happy to share that time with you. So this is from a statement that came out on Juneteenth this year, June 19th, 2020, from the National Spiritual Assembly of the Baha'is of the United States. They have said, to create a just society begins with recognition of the fundamental truth that humanity is one. But it is not enough simply to believe this in our hearts. It creates the moral imperative to act and to view all aspects of our personal, social, and institutional lives through the lens of justice. It implies a reordering of society more profound than anything we have yet achieved. And it requires the participants the participation of Americans of every race and background. For it is only through such inclusive participation that new moral and social directions can emerge. An essential element of the process will be honest and truthful discourse, which we're having here today, about current conditions and their causes, and understanding, in particular, the deeply entrenched notions of anti-Blackness that pervade our society. We must build the capacity to truly hear and acknowledge the voices of those who have directly suffered from the effects of racism. This capacity should manifest itself in our schools, the media, and other civic arenas, as well as in our work and personal relations. This should not end with words, but lead to meaningful, constructive action. And again, this is from the National Spiritual Assembly of the Baha'is of the United States. And I'll read the other one too, and then we can share our reflections for anyone who can stick around. This message just came out a few days ago on July 22nd from the Universal House of Justice. And I believe this was, they sent a statement earlier this year on the topic of race and racism as well. The American Baha'i community, the leaven destined to leaven the whole. And this particular phrase, I think, goes back to what Kate had said earlier when we were talking about this being a black and white issue, and how once we address this disease of racism in America, if we can solve it here, it will naturally and inevitably ripple throughout the world, and we will start to see the solutions happening across the globe. The American Baha'i community, the leaven destined to leaven the whole, the Guardian admonished, cannot hope to either escape the trials with which this nation is confronted, nor claim to be wholly immune from the evils that stain its character. A tremendous effort is required by both races if their outlook, their manners, and conduct are to reflect in this darkened age the spirit and teachings of the faith of Baha'u'llah. He also stated, "Let neither think that the solution of so vast a problem is a matter that exclusively concerns the other. Let neither think that such a problem can either easily or immediately be resolved. Each one should endeavor to develop and assist the other toward mutual advancement." Whoops. Racism is a profound deviation from the standard of true morality. It deprives a portion of humanity of the opportunity to cultivate and express the full range of their capability and to live a meaningful and flourishing life, while blighting the progress of the rest of humankind. It cannot be rooted out by contest and conflict. It must be supplanted by the establishment of just relationships among individuals, communities, and institutions of society that will uplift and will not designate anyone as other. The change required is not merely social and economic, but above all, moral and spiritual. Within the context of the framework governing your activities, it is necessary to carefully examine the forces unfolding around you to determine where your energies might reinforce the most promising initiatives, what you should avoid, and how you might lend a distinctive contribution. It is not possible for you to effect the transformation envisioned by Baha'u'llah merely by adopting the perspectives, practices, concepts, criticisms, and language of weighing of contemporary society. Your approach instead will be distinguished by maintaining a humble posture of learning, weighing alternatives in the light of his teachings, consulting to harmonize differing views and shape collective action, and marching forward with unbreakable unity in serried lines. Would anyone like to share a final reflection on these two quotes that we just shared earlier? I think I saw Shahrazad's hand go up. I don't know if she would still like to speak on this, or anyone else would like to share something. Okay. So what after sharing in this conversation with you, dear souls, and your contributions to this conversation, this message is reaffirming to me, and I hope it's reaffirming to you as well, that through this humble posture of learning, we accept the mistakes that we're going to make. We acknowledge the mistakes that we have made and will continue to make. And we commit to a process of growth. We commit to a process of repeated and frequent conversation, talking about reassessing, re-examining, planning new lines of action as we move forward. Sharzad Jan, I see your hand is up again. If you would like to unmute and share, please go ahead.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. Just wanted to make one comment. This is really an educational moment, educational process for all of us, especially for the non-Black, either Persian or American. Americans don't know much about what has happened. So it's educational for all of us. And then this education, non-Blacks, we have to teach ourselves. We have to find out what really the story is. And my plea to my Black friends, non-Persian, non-American friends, is they need to help us in this process. They need to help the non-Black people, especially in the Baha'i community. We should have that freedom. We should have that connectivity, that compassion, to be open to learn. I would love for Bernard, if I make a mistake in whatever I say, in whatever I present, with being a Persian, I've learned here that there are things that are okay in Persian culture to say, but in American culture, you say the same thing and it's not taken well. So we need to learn these things. We are ignorant of these things and we need to learn them. And it's heartbreaking for me to hear that Bernard or someone like him does not feel with his guards down in the Baha'i community especially. So I hope that the rest of us give him and people who are different from us that comfort, that feeling of freedom, that they can tell us, they can easily, comfortably tell us what you said was hurtful to me. And another Black person would feel the same way. So help us in learning, help us in developing ourselves. We can't do it by ourselves. I think we need help. All of us need to help each other.
Thank you, Sharzad June. And the House of Justice is telling us exactly that. Let neither think that such a problem can either easily or immediately be resolved. Right? Let neither think that the solution of so vast a problem is a matter that exclusively concerns the other. So as white and white passing people, we cannot say, oh, it didn't affect me. This is something that affected the Black community. They're going to have to fix this amongst themselves. And as Black and people of color, indigenous folks, we cannot say, well, the whites were the ones who oppressed us, so they need to fix the problem, and we sit back and the Black community and people of color sit back and wait for the white folk to solve this problem. It's not going to happen. Again, for those of you that are parents in this group, think of when your children have fought, think of the conflicts between them and how we use love. The next paragraph in this message talks about the role that love plays and the importance of love in solving this problem. And a group of friends, we got together and talked about this letter and how we had interpreted this call for love. And for some of us, it felt like what we have done as parents, where it's like, okay, just stop arguing, give each other a hug and go back to playing, right? It feels that way, but that's not what love is. Love is not hug each other and go back to playing. Love is sitting down, having the hard conversations. Love is acknowledging where we have failed. Love is apologizing for the wrongs, apologizing for the mistakes. Love is learning to use language correctly, to address things properly. Love is not creating division, right? And so all of these things go hand in hand. Did anyone else have something to share on this? Jill, I see you raise your hand. Go ahead.
I just wanted to add one thing after what the last comment was, is that there's also a lot of ways to educate yourself without having to, like, doing research. And even within the Baha'i community, there's been many talks, and like the ABS has presented many things on this topic. There's many devotionals and other things. So while we do have to work together, I think the whole burden of education should not just fall on, you know, our Black brothers and sisters to always educate us. I think that I think the permission to, like, say, yes, what you said, what might have been problematic, and to learn from it is great. And we do have to work together, but there also is a level of educating ourselves and with others that we have access to that we can also utilize. So not to just look at it from one direction, I guess.
Thank you, Joe. So going back to Todd's reflection in the video that I shared, this idea of what we've been called to spiritually and the role of spirituality in our healing, I'd like to close our session today. And again, if anyone wants to stick around after the prayers have been shared and get real personal, I'm here for all of it. Again, as a facilitator for these types of conversations, my goal is always to create a safe and open space for people to be genuine, for people to be authentic, in a space that is not judgmental, in a space that is not critical, and instead is designed to foster growth for everyone who is here to engage in that conversation. The two pieces that will be shared, the first is an old Negro spiritual that has grown out of the time of slavery, because if you think back on that time where the Black oppressed individuals really didn't have any rights. They didn't even have rights to worship. They had to come up with their own way of praising God. And in their efforts to connect to the divine and to have, even in the face of the greatest oppression and hardship and abuse, to connect with their maker, to connect with their creator in this way, and acknowledge not only their suffering, but also their reliance and their connection to the divine. This is the Morehouse Glee Club sharing that Negro spiritual called I'm Building Me a Home. And after that, I'll be sharing a prayer revealed by Baha'u'llah for unity and this message that he has brought for the world, and this plea that we will all be making together here today after this rich and fruitful conversation, that when we walk away from this today, that we will each commit to realizing what is being asked in the Negro spiritual and what Baha'u'llah is wanting for us as a species, this unity and this oneness.
Building me a home. I'm building me a home. Building me a home. I'm building me a home. Building me a home. I'm building me a home. Building me a home. I'm building me a home. This earthly house is gonna soon decay. And my soul gotta have somewhere Many dangers, swords and snares have already come. He's safe thus far, and I know it will lead me home. When you hear me moaning, I'm building me a home. When you hear me moaning, earthly house is gonna soon decay, and the soul gotta have, Lord, somewhere to stay. When you hear me shouting, yes, my Lord. When you hear me shouting, yes, Lord, shouting.
Unite the hearts of thy servants, oh my God, reveal to them thy great purpose. May they follow thy commandments and abide in thy law, and abide in thy law. Help them, oh God, in their endeavor, and grant them strength to serve thee. Oh God, lead them not to themselves. Guide their steps by the light of thy knowledge. Cheer their hearts by thy love. Verily, thou art their helper and their Lord, and their Lord, and their Lord.
Thank you so much, dear friends, for your time, for your contributions, for your tireless efforts in this work that it feels like we're all committed to doing together. I am grateful to the Sunday morning task force for giving me the opportunity to be with you today and to share in this much needed and vital conversation. Again, I think I turn over now to Sandra, I think, who will talk about next week. And if anyone else would like to, whatever the committee decides as far as sticking around for further conversation, should anyone need it, I'm at your disposal. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that talk, Hediyeh. There have been so many positive responses in the chat box. And I would also like to once again thank Mia and Lua for helping us with our opening devotions. We will definitely want to have them back again sometime. Also, I'm sure we will have Hediyeh back in the future. At this time, I'd like to invite everyone to join us again next week at 10:30 for our service or our TAR. And at this point, anyone who would like to stay and chat with Hediyeh, please feel free. Thank you.